But you would think that at some point when you have a whole heap of researchers coming out to say, your research hasn't been conducted properly, it
Hmm.
hasn't come to the correct conclusions, you're
Hmm.
basically talking about biased stuff and not
Yeah.
factual evidence. You'd think that you'd stop researching and get off the bandwagon, but Craig Anderson, who actually apparently directs the Centre for the Study of Violence at Iowa State University, he's published research recently and a meta-analysis about violent video games. You and another researcher, John Kilburn,
Hmm.
provided comment about that. Could you describe some of the things that you wrote?
Oh yeah, we pointed out this is a really a deeply flawed meta-analysis that is incredibly misleading, and even if you ignore the various flaws in the meta-analysis itself, they find almost no effect, very close to zero. And the kind of language that they're using to describe their results is irresponsible. Quite frankly, I don't know how much less effect they could possibly find that would convince them that there's really little to nothing there. But we were concerned a lot of the methodology of the study that they included a number of their own studies, for instance, particularly unpublished studies of their own. And of their close colleagues, but did not solicit unpublished studies or others, even some published studies from other authors, particularly those who were very critical of them in the past. If you only include the studies that are your own or support your view, well, of course you can find whatever you want in that sense, but that's not remotely good science. It's a very biased approach.
How do they get away with it? How can a researcher get away with putting out research that doesn't have a factual basis?
There are fewer checks and balances than you would think. Here's basically the scenario. You have reviewers A, B, C, and D. A, B, C, and D are all colleagues. They're all well known. They all have worked together. Some are students of the others. They're former graduate students and whatnot. They're all colleagues. They all work together. They all publish together. I mean, the peer review process is certainly important, and it can work well in some cases. But in other cases where you tend to get a small cluster of researchers who are very influential and who all work together, you can have developed, what's called groupthink. They can't see the errors in their own ways, essentially. Unfortunately, that can result in sort of the edification of bad methodology, of bad data, in which, sort of indoctrinated views get perpetuated, whereas newer views or skepticism is not encouraged.
Recently, we've had a discussion paper for an introduction for an R18 rating for video games, and I suppose that's why this debate is popping up at this time of year. Does more have to be done to check research like this to make sure that governments don't consider it as fact?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, I would hope that there was more, fact checking on this. I mean, there's a couple of examples. I mean, but the problem is there is very little fact checking, and there are a couple of examples of these urban legends, essentially, that get passed on, and governments eat them up, and even some of the researchers eat them up, and again, there's very little fact checking even within the scientific community itself, which is very sad to say, but it's sort of the reality. And one of them is this smoking and lung cancer thing. Now, the statistics that this is based on are flawed. They're deeply flawed. But I mean, it shows you the degree to which these, again, I call them urban legends, can really take hold in the public imagination, or at least in the imagination of some of these scientists, and they can't let them go.
Even though your research shows that aggression isn't necessarily caused by playing violent video games, should we still be censoring violent media from children and young people?
Not for any practical reason. I mean, I suppose the only argument you could make that I would have any respect for is that you're just simply morally opposed to something. And if you say, hey, look, I know this doesn't do anything, but I'm just morally opposed to X. Okay, I mean that's a personal viewpoint, and there's nothing that can argue against that. So, if people have a moral objection, you just come out and say it, and say, I just don't like it, that kind of thing. But to try to argue that there's some sort of practical gain here, that's actually going to do something to the kids, is being dishonest. Whether people are being dishonest with themselves or purposely being dishonest in order to manipulate, the politics or whatever, or to perhaps, push their own morality onto others. That's all, it's a possibility. That's the only reason I can think of to ban these video games is simply that, you don't like them. If you're just a student of history, you can look and see the same cycle over and over again with, jazz music, dime novels, Elvis Presley, every single time. It's all about morality. People don't like Elvis Presley wiggling his hips or whatever else. They think it's, and they all get concerned that all the children are going to run out and start having sex or whatever else. And then you find a few scientists who are willing to come out and say, yes, Elvis Presley is, the scourge of youth everywhere, and so on and so forth. And it takes a while, 20, 30 years before you realize, well, hey, wait a minute, nothing happened. Nothing bad went on. Right now, we're in the middle of that. We can see that, in most nations, even though video games have soared in popularity, that the violent crime rates among youth have plummeted. In the U.S., Canada, U.K., and in most other Western nations, youth violence rates are at the lowest level they've been since the 1960s. I know that you hear a lot about, people go back and forth, say, crime is up, crime is up, crime is, and if you actually look at the statistics on crime, in most nations it's down, not up. So I think we can say for sure at this point that, violent video games have not sparked a youth violence epidemic or a violent crime epidemic. There is none. So it's time to start focusing on other things.